A lot of people have been taking note of the very negative, corrupting influence that various major institutions in society are having on children in particular, right? With education, the introduction of bizarre, grotesque ideas and activities that are clearly not in the interest of the health and well-being, you know, of the child. Why are they doing this, in general, in society, towards everybody? Why is the entertainment industry so twisted, right? Holly weird. Why do they keep pushing all this uh, morally corrupt content? Like, why is it just seemingly impossible for them just to put out a decent movie with like decent values? Like, why does it always gotta be some form of psychological manipulation to uh, put you in a state of moral confusion? So this is a good question, and um, it's been beneficial to society that Christians in particular have been questioning this and resisting it. But I haven't heard a full explanation, or uh, maybe a very concise explanation on why this is occurring. And I think it's important to understand what the main motivation behind it is, because then it makes sense as to why it's happening in all these various ways when um, there doesn't seem to be uh, a purely profit motive. Like, it doesn't seem like this is necessarily making them more money. It seems more intent on actually changing the way people think into a more morally confused, or morally incorrect way. And the basic answer is that it's about disempowerment and gaining control through that disempowerment. So that's been taken note of by folks that have analyzed, communism and Marxism. They'll say, well, the end goal of all of this is just to give the state more power, in the name of safety or in the name of justice. Every policy that they push, whether it's disarming nonviolent people, or whether it's medical tyranny, or whether it's hate speech laws, it's all just about giving the state more power. And that's a good observation. That is cutting through the surface level, getting to a deeper level. But even deeper than that, even more fundamental than that, is recognizing that it's to get you to go along with something immoral. And the reason why being because there is actually power aligned with virtue, right? This is why the Messiah was teaching us to align with his greatest commandments, because of the power, the empowerment that goes with it, right? It's the real freedom, right? So, in order to escape the slavery of a system that's basically satanic, we need to align with the freedom giving virtue that the Messiah pointed us to. So, like I said, there's been acknowledgement of, well, this is just trickery to basically enslave us more. But the other half of that, the other crucial side of that, or even more fundamental root of that slavery, is actually slavery to sin, slavery to um, following immorality. And they can go about this in two main ways. One is by brainwashing people, children, in particular, that the good is actually bad and the bad is good. And this is done in two major ways. as I explained in the previous talk, which is the two ways that humans are most violent on the grandest scale. They've actually convinced humanity, most people, those two vehicles of greatest abuse, those two greatest violations of the greatest commandments, are actually perfectly fine. And you're actually a good person if you go along with those. So I'll let you listen to that previous talk if you want to hear more on that. But that's one method, is to brainwash people into thinking good is bad and bad is good. And so they think they're doing the right thing, but they're actually not, you know. They think going along with medical tyranny is, you know, the right thing. They think they're being compassionate because that's what the propaganda is telling them, right? That they're being more caring by submitting to the surrender of bodily autonomy to the state, right? They're told that the slavery is good, right? It's this Orwellian propaganda. The other method is just to straight coerce people to go along with things that they normally wouldn't, but they feel like they have no choice. So again, returning to medical tyranny as a great example, a lot of people didn't think it was really morally the right thing to do to accept these mandates. They didn't think it made scientific sense or moral sense, but they did so because they might lose their job. And if they lost their job, they were concerned, well, I might not be able to provide for my family, right? So they were coerced into compliance with something that otherwise they might, or that they do actually fundamentally consider immoral, but they feel like they were, you know, had their back against the wall kind of thing. So those, again, are the two main ways that people are uh, usually deceived, is by brainwashing them into having an inverted understanding of real morality, or by just coercing them. And I guess you could say the third method is just to corrupt people's morality to such an extent that they then actually willingly go along with it and just become, you know, pawns for the devil system. And you see that, you know, especially in the entertainment industry, where people seem to have, you know, literally sold their soul to the devil to keep propagating this depravity to humanity. And advertising is a main vehicle of propaganda. I don't think most people realize just how much of advertising is just straight propaganda vehicle. It has nothing to do with selling some product, nothing whatsoever. And you can actually recognize this for yourself by just asking yourself, do I even know what this is selling? Right? Like, because oftentimes it's not even at all clear what the product or service is that's being supposedly, you know, advertised. It's just to bombard you with a certain emotion, usually fear, or with a certain idea. It's not about selling a product. So, like during the lockdowns, there billboards just covered the country, just showing people standing with masks wearing, showing people wearing masks. And oftentimes it wouldn't be clear at all what the advertisement was about. Like there would be some, you know, words in the corner for some organization or some product or something, but that wasn't the purpose of the billboard. The billboard was just to normalize a herd of people complying with the mandate, and that this is normal. This is what everyone's doing. This is what you should do too. Likewise with advertising, especially on the internet, where, you know, before you can skip the ad, if you even have that option, they're just going to hit you with like something disturbing right off the bat. And it's like, why? What's the point of that? You know, like it doesn't seem to be, or even if you listen past the point where, you know, where you could um, skip the ad, it's still not even clear. Like, what is this? It's just pushing something disturbing. It's again because it's disempowering, right? It's not necessarily about trying to sell you something. I mean, nothing physical. What they're trying to sell you is the fear. They're trying to sell you alignment with a non-virtuous mind. And fear is actually a vice. That's part of the propaganda, is that these vices, are sometimes good, right? Like, oh, fear, it's a survival mechanism. If no one was afraid, if our ancestors were never afraid, they would just, walk right off a cliff, or they'd, walk right up to a growling tiger because they didn't have fear. And if you actually think about that for a second, it makes zero sense, right? You don't need fear to avoid something that's obviously dangerous, right? Like, if you're at a campfire with some friends, do you need to be constantly afraid of the fire right in front of you to like keep a safe distance from it? No, right? So fear, along with other toxic emotions like anger and craving, are actually vices for us to reject. And so by promoting them beyond any product, like the priority is actually to promote the vice. Whatever the product is secondary, if, even considered at all. So that's why it's just this constant stream of advertisements pushing fear, pushing compliance with immoral institutions. That's why it's, just fast food imagery, meat on the screen like every 5 minutes, or every minute. These big blown up pictures of hamburgers like rotating in your face. It's not just about selling you the hamburger, it's about getting you to accept this abuse and to think it's normal. Oh yeah, you're an omnivore. God doesn't care if you hurt animals. It doesn't matter at all. Yeah. Just normalization of immorality. Growing up, in schools, they teach you, oh, of course, paying your taxes and being a good equal, being a good citizen equals being a good person. Normalization of acceptance of immorality is what gives them power on a physical and psychological and spiritual level. So fundamentally, it's all about steering you away from salvation, which is what the Messiah taught. And even the church, having been corrupted, will do the same, right? Because they give you this distorted Pauline version of Christianity where they don't actually focus in on what Jesus taught, which is obedience to his commandments as the means to salvation. And instead they replace it with this amoral, blood power theology. So again, it's all about steering you away from getting your moral compass in hand, the correct moral compass in hand, and following that more and more. So yes, it's about disempowering you to give the state more control. The state now being equivalent to a global system, and getting you to lose the power, lose the empowerment that actually comes with alignment with the commandments, right? It's actually alignment with the commandments that aligns us with the grace, which aligns us with empowerment. I'll put down a couple Bible verses that speak to this, that it's not that uh, God's hand was too short to reach, is that our sins kept us distant from him, right? So there is actually a connection between virtue and power. And interestingly, in the ancient Taoist tradition, in the Tao Te Ching book, the word day, spelled Te or De, is translated as virtue or power or both. It's this idea that virtue and power are actually interrelated, and that aligning with that aligns you with Tao or the way. Right? And the original followers of Jesus actually called their group the Way, right? So aligning with that way, that again, Yeshua HaMashiach very specifically and clearly taught us, if we would just, listen to him rather than all these other voices, and listen to the real him and not just the version that church authorities let us hear, in the corrupted and limited text that it omits a lot of truth, then we could get disentangled from a system of disempowerment that is ultimately satanic, right? If Christ wants us to be free through following a moral law, well, guess what? The enemy, Satan, is trying to do the complete opposite. He's trying to enslave us by making us go an immoral way. It's very simple, right? It's just very logical that the enemy would do the complete opposite of what the Messiah is telling us to do, that the enemy would try to influence us to do the complete opposite. And so that's why everything is steered towards, everything coming through the institutions is steered towards greater immorality. And some of it is, become so obvious that people are resisting, and so they're not just falling into that third method of becoming compromised willingly. But unfortunately, a lot of folks don't see the other method in operation, where they've been tricked into thinking something bad is actually good. Like they've been tricked into thinking that this blood power atonement theology is actually good, is actually humble and somehow congruent with what Jesus taught, when it's neither. People have been tricked into thinking, oh yeah, eating animals, that's okay with God. That's what he wants us to do. And following the teachings of Paul about being obedient to slave masters and governments. Yeah, this is what God wants. So tricked that way into alignment with immorality. So that's the deeper understanding of why the world is so messed up, and why it keeps leaning and manipulating people to sin mentally, in their thoughts, and what emotion thoughts you choose to follow or not, like fear versus courage, for example, or calmness versus anger, or temperance versus craving. And then externally, like whether you go along with statism and carnism and, tyranny, communism in general, and, or alternatively, you support voluntary relations and non-abusive activities towards other sentient creatures. So I hope this added clarification was helpful to you. All right, take care.